With the current crisis going on in Cuba right now, we get a chance to see a real world event of a government literally stealing on two fronts from their citizens, all in hopes of trying to keep the support of their citizens. And so here I have a couple convertible pesos that as of this month, if not already, are no longer worth anything. It's one of those things where you either convert it or you lose it, and they were already losing purchasing power well before now. Let's talk about this. All right, so I want to take a quick minute and share my 2 cents on something that's taking place in the country of Cuba, because Cuba, a place near and dear to my heart, had a chance to visit there a couple of times and definitely had a great experience there, just being a part of the culture and getting a chance to learn some historical aspects of that nation there. And so the article circulating around the internet over the weekend that I want to make sure I touched on, because if you look deeper into the article, it gives a much more in-depth look as to what's really going on there. It has a lot to do with the debt that Cuba owes to their creditors, which happens to be in Europe, and how it looks like they may be trying to take the last remaining dollars from the public's hands, even though, from my experience there, the Cuban people did not necessarily enjoy having Federal Reserve notes because there was already a 10% tax on those notes. But before I dive into a couple articles here, just want to give you a little bit of background as to my experience there in Cuba. And so, as I mentioned, I had a chance to visit the country a few times. I had a chance to sit down and have some real in-depth conversations with, a female entrepreneur, as well as an individual that's well connected within the streets. And then to cap it all off, I ended up having a chance to sit down with someone who was well versed and actually had experience in the whole revolution, which took place, 50 years ago. From those conversations, I had a chance to get a well-rounded viewpoint on the country of Cuba, from the older generation all the way up into the current time frame. And it was definitely a great learning experience for me and my family when we went there. And then also, one of the biggest benefits is whenever I do travel or had a chance of traveling, I like to make sure I get involved in the community. So I had a chance there to give back to the community by working with the kids there. And definitely we had a blast, because one of the benefits of sports is that it's universal. And primarily every country has a chance to speak. There are no borders when it comes to linking communities through the game of basketball. And so in front of me here, I have two different sets of currency units. One has a deadline while the other one's being destroyed, all along while trying to prop up the economy with this one right here. So I'm going to thumb through these articles real quick, and then at the very end, I'll give you the synopsis on how Cuban people, if solely dependent upon these paper units here, they're going to be in big trouble down there. Here's the first article I want to touch on real quickly. It says, Cuba suspends cash deposits in dollars, citing embargo challenges. And I highlight a couple things here. I'm just going to scan through real quickly, give you my gist on the whole situation. But it says Cuba will temporarily stop accepting cash deposits in dollars at its bank starting on June 21st. I mean, by next week. It says bank transfers will still be accepted and account holders will be able to withdraw funds from their dollar accounts. And reason why it says obstacles that the US embargo creates, it says a decision has been made to temporarily suspend deposits in US banknotes in Cuba's banks. When I first saw this article here, one of the things that stood out to me is like, wow, like why did they put a time frame on their need for dollars? And my personal opinion is the fact that as of right now, this is the government of Cuba's attempt to try to get as many dollars that might be circulating within the country amongst 11 or so million individuals and have them things deposited in the bank account all at one time, so they can basically collect a pot of dollars so that they can tally up what they do have on the island and be able to use that to pay their foreign creditors. And so this whole article here is not designed to benefit the people, is more so designed to provide funding for the government because they are in need of dollars to meet their obligations outside the country. And what does that do? Whatever dollars are worth in that country, which to us, they have power, but within that country there, every transaction that might take place in dollars is already hiked up due to inflation, as well as a shortage of goods on an island. Items have not been imported, especially over the last year, given this whole global lockdown. So dollars there do carry a premium, of which the people might be concerned that if they do not deposit them, they might be stuck holding dollars. That will definitely lose its purchasing power, especially with what the United States government's doing right now by weaponizing the dollar. So they're kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place, because on one side, I'm sure they might want to deposit the dollar so they'll have access to use their little smart cards down there. But more than likely, if they get rid of those dollars, they're going to have to put them in circulation or sell them for a premium, or at the end of the day, be stuck holding a bag of Federal Reserve notes as the whole central bank digital currency, Fed coin situations rolled out. And so it's one of the things where they run the risk of having too many dollars. They may not be able to leave the island and end up being stuck holding the bag. This article here says Cuba to devalue peso steeply in January in major monetary overhaul. So this article here was as of last year. And I've been keeping an eye on this whole event for quite some time now. And when I saw this, I knew what time it was. I knew that it was going to be an issue having two parallel currencies. And of course, one currency here, the CUC, this was pegged at a 1-to-1 ratio with the US dollar ever since 1959. And then you have the local currency here, which is just a Cuban peso, which is the most used currency because this is what the locals tend to use on a day-to-day basis. So the professionals use this one, and then the local individuals use this one, and they carry two different measurements of purchasing power completely. And I'll get into that in 1 second. But the article says here, Cuban said late on Thursday it would scrap its dual currency and labor within multiple exchange rate systems in January, effectively devaluing the peso heavily to administer bitter medicine for its crisis-stricken economy. So here you have an individual holding the Cuban peso. And mind you, look at the wear and tear on this note here. It's been through some things because those things have been circulated heavily down there. I got some stories to tell about that one. It says the devaluation comes amid Cuba's worst economic crisis since the collapse of the former benefactor of the Soviet Union due to the tightening of the U.S. trade embargo and fallout from the pandemic. It says for nearly 3 decades, two currencies have circulated in Cuba's state-run economy, the peso and the convertible peso pegged to the dollar. And then imagine, once again, getting this type of information here. Day zero is what it was called. It says Cubans will have 180 days to change their CUC. And so the CUC, as I mentioned, is a currency that is more so used for exporting because it was pegged to the dollar 1-to-1. And so as a foreigner coming in, as soon as you arrive at the airport, you would exchange and more than likely get these because this is what you would tend to do business with if you were doing business on the tourism side of things. And it wouldn't be too far-fetched for people to give you change in these Cuban pesos, of which I had a couple experiences in a taxi cab, giving them the CUCs, but then getting back the Cuban pesos and wondering, did they give me more change or whatever? But it was very confusing on the convertibility of having two different currencies, which made it a learning experience all within itself. And the reason this is so important because here it says exclusive. Cuba and wealthy creditors hope to save landmark accord. And so it's one of those things where a lot of funds were provided Cuba over the last several years to help build up the tourism, especially when the Obama administration lessened the embargo restrictions on them, and a lot of fresh investments was coming into the country up until the prior administration and Donald Trump decided to cut back on things. And of course, having a chance to speak to locals, I got a chance to hear exactly what they thought about the prior administration at that time. And the last one here says Cuba is in Paris for debt talks. It says it probably won't change its reputation as a serial defaulter. And so this is what's happening in the country of Cuba. And on the surface, it's not getting any attention whatsoever other than an article here or there that's been given here in the United States of America. But yet, I remember from firsthand experience there how dire the situation was. And this was, a couple years ago when things were relatively calm in nature, of how locals there operate on a totally different mind frame there. I mean, they live in what is literally considered a third world country ultimately, but yet they were very peaceful and overall enthusiastic people about life. I noticed one of the biggest things I experienced there was the fact that it didn't matter what time of the day it was, whether it was early morning, evening, or the afternoon. Whenever you saw people in the street, they were overly friendly. And it was one of those things where everyone always made a point when they recognized foreigners, they would love to go above and beyond because their motto is ultimately that there was never any rush to go anywhere. Their living standards and their expectations for life was a lot different than here in the developed world. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they have government handouts and things like that, which makes it hard to really work to expect much on a day-to-day basis in our country. But one of the things I want to mention before I dial back is the fact that these two different currencies right here, these tell a heck of a story in and of themselves because, as I mentioned, this one right here is the one that they're canceling. Think about this. If you were holding this as a professional in your bank account in Cuba, so right here I have 50 CUCs or 50 convertible pesos, and as of this month, if not already, this 50 you would have to convert over into the local peso. You couldn't convert these over into dollars just because the peg is no longer. And so automatically by taking this 1-to-1 peg and going back into your old currency, so here's a 50. So here's $50 as well. So these are 250 stacks. This has a purchasing power at, prior to last year at a $50 bill. Taking this 50 and going back into this here, where the exchange rate, the official exchange rate was 1-to-24, means that you're taking a heck of a haircut and going back into something that was worth less. And then you factor in, this is no longer available. You cannot convert back into dollars. And then with this one here, as a result of this new dollar policy where you can take your dollars or take your CUCs and turn them in and get this only, This means that you're taking well over a 50 to 75% haircut just in going back to your local currency. So think about the lack of purchasing power that people already did not have. Imagine how much less you're going to have now in dealing with these units right here. And one of the things I always found interesting was that all these units here are just paper notes with people who were a part of the revolution or major figures in their history, but yet just colorful notes with numbers on them. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when the governments get in trouble from owing too much debt, they always renege on the promises with their citizens. And guess who's stuck holding the bag? The people themselves. So once again, I just want to check in real quick, share my 2 cents on this. But it looks like due to the debt crisis, the Cuban in trouble. So they're looking to grab as many dollars as they can. And of course, the article mentioned that it's temporary. But mind you, there's nothing going to be temporary about this transition because the entire globe is experiencing a monetary transition. And so a lot of people might be mentioning, well, they need to go to Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is definitely there, I'm sure. But it's one of those things where Cuba, by it being a third world country, the infrastructure was never completed there. And so I remember in my time there, only way you can use internet is actually to go to an internet park somewhere in the local community where you sit there under a Wi-Fi signal amongst the entire community, and you all plug into one little Wi-Fi router. And of course, since then, I've heard they've added a couple things, but on average, you got, prepaid minutes, infrastructure's, real still poor in a sense. And the average individual within the country, outside of the younger population, they're not too tech savvy where they would even know how to go about doing that. And so no doubt there's people there to have that, but yet on average, most people don't even have the know-how. And of course, gold and silver, to my knowledge, when I was walking around, outside of just jewelry, maybe you might find some silver, but yet, once again, where did that stuff come from? They don't have shops. And even though their coinage, well before the revolution, had silver and had gold in it, majority of the people who are alive now in Cuba, they don't know nothing about that. So it's one of those things where there's not many options for them. And so cryptocurrency might be valid for them now, but I'd imagine in a very short time frame, a Cuban CBDC will be on its way out, because majority of the people there receive government assistance. They're all going to be rolled right into the CBDC. And unless there's some type of change with the U.S. opening up access to allow nations to do business with Cuba, I don't expect much to change there. So yeah, it's an interesting story down there. So I just want to take a minute, share my 2 cents on this. I'm curious if I have any people out there of Cuban descent. Let me know what you're seeing. Definitely give me a call tonight on the live stream. I would love to hear from you. All right, be blessed.